There is nothing at all conceptually problematic about the view. It is every bit as empirical confirmable in principle as the proposition that massive wombats live in the northern hemisphere of Pluto. Such a taste will therefore, under the sentence, would created and rules the universe without undergoing anything metaphysical and thus perhaps intelligibly. It follows that G1 is perfectly intelligible definition of God, provided that the definition of one supreme being itself is intelligible. So, if what proposition, if that proposition is met, as it shall be shown to be, then non-consecutivist one is a mystic view. Yes. Let us next consider G1. What do theists who employ it is such derby, meaning by the most perfect being? This is another hollow empirical question, but again based on the properties most theists ascribe to God. It's unreasonable to suppose that by the expression most of them mean the being who is alleged to be eternal, omnipotent, omniscient, and omnibenevolent. Ergo, most theists will probably take the one supreme being and the most perfect being as synonymous. They might also mean a being who is unmutable, transcendent, omnipresent, and all merciful, and or all just. However, for the sake of simplicity, that is, for the moment suppose the mean just being with the former set of properties, i.e., everlastingness, omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. I doubt if any non-constitutivist will classify everlastingness as an incurrent property or predicated. After all, it seems quite clear what it could mean for something to persist forever throughout time. Potential problems arise, however, when it comes to omnipotence, omniscience, and omnibenevolence. Before getting into them, let us first formulate precisely the definition of the terms at issue. The three omnipotence for any person, P is omnipotence if and only if P can perform any act that is both conceivable and compatible with all of P's other essential characteristics. Therefore, omniscience for any person P is omniscience if and only if P has all and only three propositions as beliefs. D5 omnibenevolent for any person P is omnibenevolent if and only if P loves everyone maximally. Some texts might claim that D3, D5 do not reflect the meaning of the given terms, as they typically use them, but probably most of them will accept those definitions. Most theists, like most theologians, will probably agree that God's actions are constrained by at least logic and consistency with his other essential attributes. In other words, most, as this is logically impossible, and most would probably agree with that God cannot commit evil acts as evil acts in as much I don't know the word As the will contradict his omniscience and the property of possessing maximal procedural and experiential knowledge, in addition to maximal propositional knowledge. Most of them will likely take the last as sufficient. Similarity, while some might say that omnibenevolence involves more than just loving everyone maximally, most of them would probably say that properly is enough on its own. Although the three and the four gives rise to certain oddities and perhaps even paradox, they are free of many of the effects of that plague more traditionally impressible definition of kingdoms. For example, the definition of omnipotence and as having all power, and the definition of omniscient as having all the knowledge. In any case, they certainly do not turn good to exist in the pattern nonsense, and that is all that we are concerned with there. Matter are not quite so clear, however, with respect to the five, what may be meant by the expression maximally loving. One popular definition is this six. Maximally loving. For any person P is maximally loving if and only if P always does everything in P's power to protect everyone's best long-term interest out of a concern of others' welfare. The problem here is how to construe this six in such a way that sentences for the form X does that which is everyone's best long-term interest out of concern of others' welfare express more than mere value judgments, as it might be objected that value judgments do not constitute propositions. However, we must also construe the six in a way that is considered with how most taste would interpret thus that which is everyone's best long-term interests out of concern for other welfare. Is the project is moot. First thought, we must consider whether this six is a definition that most taste will accept at all. I think that is for if we were to ask the average believer what he means when he said that God is all good, he will likely reply along this line, I mean that God always does that is right or good or just, etc. And his nature is perfectly righteous, and so his actions cannot fail to be ethical. And while probably we wouldn't reject utilitarian theory and ethics in favor of means to be perfectly righteous and to act ethically is to never needlessly, intentionally, inflict harm upon anyone. He will trust us surely agree that a necessary condition for praising of benevolence, but it is quite it is quite it's quite unlikely that he would also view as a suffering condition for that, and that is the reason for including the qualifier of concern for others' welfare. That is, somebody could invariably avoid causing gratuitous harm, and yet at least sometimes do it for the wrong reasons. I not do it out of altruism. Any manner of selfish motive might impel him to appear magnanimous, waiting to win the praise and admiration of others, waiting to avoid obstacles to his own happiness and so forth. From the standpoint of the average face, then always acting in a way which protects everyone best. Long-term interest is allows insufficient to make one omnibenevolent. There is more to it than just that. In other words, an additional factor in question of acting out of concern of others' welfare. As this takes that factor into account, I think most theists will agree that is accurate captures the idea of maximal love. It turns now, it, I turn now to the task of assigning the bird face does that which is in everyone's best long-term interest, out of concern for others' welfare. Non-morality evaluative or amoral analysis. The most obvious candidate provides everyone with a greater degree of happiness or comfort, well-being, etc. that could any other act and does not regret it of P own desires. Then P does that which is everyone.